everyone! It is that time of the month where I'm going to do my monthly wrap-up. The books that I read in June are behind me and I just want to get started, so let's do that, shall we? In June, I started the month with reading the 6th book in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and I finished the month by reading the 7th and final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. So that means I have now concluded the series. I have read all of the books in English, reread. That is to say, I have read them before, but it was ages ago, so it was so nice to read them again. I feel accomplished now that I have finished the series, and of course I gave both books 5 stars. I continued June with reading the 2nd book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This is The Well of Ascension. I love this series. This book didn't disappoint me at all. I loved the first book and this one was not better, but just as good, I believe. We have some new characters and some new monsters in this book and I really loved it. I especially loved the... I don't want to spoil you, but there was one kind of monsters that was so... they were so horrible, so terrible, and I could vividly imagine them in my head. So I really love this series, and I'm definitely going to pick up the 3rd and final book during June. Then I read a monster of a book, and that is City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. I was very interested to see how this all would end. I read the first 5 books back in October, I believe, and to be honest, when I hear about this story of demons and demon hunters and all these different kinds of creatures, I don't think it sounds so interesting because, to be honest, I like for my stories to be just a little bit realistic, if you understand, and this is not realistic at all. But there is something about this series that just really intrigues me. I love it. This conclusion was really good. I think that Cassandra Clare managed to wrap it all up beautifully. The only thing is I didn't really like the middle part of the book because it reminded me a little bit too much of House of Hades by Rick Riordan, and I didn't particularly like that book, so I was a little bit disappointed by that. But the rest of the book was beautiful, absolutely amazing. I haven't read the Infernal Devices trilogy and I have been spoiled now, but I was so furious that you had to read those before you had to read this one. I didn't want to wait. I wanted to read this and I wanted to conclude this series and feel accomplished. So I did, and now I have been spoiled. I will try to forget the spoilers and read the Infernal Devices in maybe a year or so, because I am going to read that one. But right now I'm just happy to be able to say that I have finished all of this big series. I gave this book 4 stars. Afterwards I read Fire with Fire by Jenny Han and Siobhan Vivian, the 2nd book in the Burn for Burn trilogy. The 3rd book is coming out in August or September, I believe, and yes, I'm so happy about that because I love this book. I think this one was even better than the first one. I think a lot of people will disagree with me about that because this book doesn't have as much action as the first book. In the first book we hear a lot more about the revenge part of the story and it's all very interesting, and in this book we follow the characters more closely and it isn't really until the end that we get some really cruel action. I just love those kinds of books. I love getting close to characters, I love getting to know them better, and that is why I definitely prefer this book from the first one. I gave this one 5 stars, and let me tell you something. If you take off the dust jacket, you will see, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it has some red spots on it. And the reason for that is I read this book outside at my sister's garden, and there were some really nasty bugs that just kept on splattering on my white book. Now I will remember that forever. I read this book outside, I absolutely loved it, and I have some nice bugs to go with it. Then I got a message from the mailman saying that I had a package waiting for me, and I was super excited. And in that package, this book was Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson. Morgan Matson is one of my favorite contemporary authors, so as soon as I got home with the heavy package, I grabbed this one and I started reading, and I had finished it by the next day. The thing is, I gave this book 5 stars because it is really entertaining. I love the dialogue, I love the characters, I really love the characters in this book, and it was just so good. It's not like it was extraordinary, I think. It's not like it was on the Harry Potter level, if you understand what I mean, but it has something. It has, yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but I ended up giving it 5 stars because I really enjoyed the book. It made me feel all summery inside, it made me feel happy, and I love the way that it all concluded. I really couldn't imagine how this would all end, and it ended, so it was really surprising and entertaining. This is about a main character who I have forgotten the name of, but she has a best friend named Sloane. One day, Sloane disappears. Her family members are gone, her house is empty, and her best friend hasn't been told anything at all. So she is left alone, and it is in the beginning of the summer, and she had all these plans with Sloane, and now she has nothing. Until she receives a letter from Sloane with a list of 13 things that she needs to do during summertime. She does it because it makes her feel close to Sloane, it makes her feel like she has a purpose, and she believes when she has finished this list, she will meet Sloane again. It is, as I said, really entertaining. I love Morgan Matson's writing style. I love how her books make me feel good about myself. Or not myself, just good in general, and this book didn't disappoint me. 5 stars for me. Then I started a new trilogy, and I'm definitely going to finish this during July. But I read the first book in June, and that is Perfect Chemistry by Simone L. Kells. It was okay. I think I rated it 3.5 stars because it made me happy, it made me gooey inside sometimes, but it wasn't extraordinary. I think I kind of was a little bit tired of all the gangs and all the you have to be tough and you have to do this, otherwise I will kill your family. I didn't really particularly feel close to the characters, but this is basically a love story between a gang member and a girl who is not at all a gang member. She is the perfect rich girl who has everything, and she falls in love with this gang member. I cannot remember any of their names, but it was entertaining. Yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars, and I am curious to continue this series. I believe that we will in the next book follow the gang member's brother, and so on and so on. Then I picked up Beautiful Malice by Rebecca James, and this was one of the books that I received from Sine, from A Bottle of Sine, because we did a book swap and she sent me 2 unknown books. This is one of those. I knew nothing about this book when I started reading, but I wanted to read it anyway because Sine kept saying it was one of her favorite books. It has a very interesting ending and it has some cruel characters, and I agree with her. This was not a summary read that just makes you feel good inside. This had some serious subjects in it, and I love that because sometimes it can be a little bit too much when everything is perfect and everything wraps up beautifully. I want for stories to have some interesting and serious subjects in it, so this one gave me that. Basically it deals with the main character who has a friend who likes to steal all the attention, basically. This friend, I believe the friend is called Alice. Malice? I didn't realize that. I realized that. Okay, Alice, who is also Malice. Yeah, Malice. I don't know. I'm confused now. Anyway, this best friend turns out not to be as good a friend as we would think she was. And I'm not going to say much else. It is a heartbreaking story, basically, but it is also very beautiful, and I really loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour, a very recent release. I was very interested to read it and see what I thought of it. This is about a main character called Emmy, and Emmy is a lesbian, and yeah, I'm mentioning that because that is a twist to the story that is quite interesting, I believe. However, the story is not about her being lesbian. It is about her life, how she works as not a film producer, what is the name of that? She helps creating the sets of the movies. So if she is being told you have to create this living room, for this next movie, she goes out and finds a couch, a table, some lamps, some posters, etc. And that is basically her job. There is more to this story. A lot more to it. Right now I'm making it sound very boring. It's not at all. I gave this book 4 stars because it was highly interesting, highly entertaining, and basically just a really good book. It's not too long either. So it's one of those books that is easily read and very interesting, I think. But it's right now, I just really can't remember too much of it. So it didn't leave too much of an impression on me, but I still enjoyed it. Ripsat Readathon started, and that is basically the Read Your Bookshelf-a-thon that took place during a week in June, and I participated in half of it. And the reason why I haven't done a Ripsat wrap-up is because I failed, basically. I did so well on the first 3 days, and then I didn't read anything else from that specific bookshelf. I just completely abandoned it, and that is because of one book, but I will get to that later. Basically, the bookshelf that I read from is over here. There is a big gap here, and that is the 3 books that I managed to read. I first picked up The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This is the novella bind-up of the Throne of Glass series. We have 5 novellas in here. I loved novellas 1, 3, and 5. They were excellent, and number 2 and 4 were interesting as well, but not as interesting as the other ones. I think this was so great. I really loved it. I actually think I gave it 5 stars, so that was good. Next book on my shelf was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This book was a challenge because the first 100 pages didn't make sense at all. They did make sense, but I was very confused. I couldn't understand what was going on. I had a hard time getting into the writing style. This was my first book by Pierce Brown, and I just really couldn't get into his writing style. I did eventually, and people told me that I needed to keep going because it would get better and easier to understand. So I did, and I'm glad I did, because I was able to understand the story after all. It was interesting, and it takes place on Mars. So that alone is very interesting, I think. Basically, we have a main character who works on Mars, and some things happen to him. He manages to escape his life, basically, and start a new life. So he's being transformed, his body is being transformed, for lack of words, and he starts this new life. I just said the same sentence twice, because I don't know how to express myself today. Anyway, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. While I was reading, I saw this stunning picture of the author, and that kept me going, because he was just, something for me. So yes, 3 stars. It is interesting. I quite enjoyed it, and if any of you have read it, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Now we have come to the book that made me abandon Ripsat, because I was so frustrated and so furious, and I didn't want to continue with the next book on my shelves. I needed to pick up something completely different after that. But the book is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. And I know, a lot of you are going to be shocked, because this is a great book, you say. No. I gave this book 2 stars, and one of the main reasons for that is I had heard that Cold Town was a place in which vampires lived. And that is what really got my attention when I bought this book. I wanted to read about a scary place in which vampires lived and where you didn't want to go at all. And then I realized that our main character would love to go there. She actually is being bitten by a vampire, and then she willingly goes to this town because she's being dragged by this vampire thing, and she falls in love with a vampire. And I just don't understand why authors keep romanticizing these vampires. Vampires are supposed to be cruel, and you don't want to mingle with them. That's the first rule. And this book basically didn't honor that rule at all. I didn't like it. I gave it 2 stars. I think I liked about 20% of the book, and I hated the rest of the 80% of the book. because it was just not for me. This book made me want to read something completely new, something that I knew I would love, and that is why I picked up The Art of Fielding by Chad Harbach. And this is an adult book about baseball. We follow our main character, who is a baseball star. He just never makes any faults. He is excellent, he is perfect, and he is being given these scholarships because he's just so good at what he is doing. However, one day he loses that ability. Suddenly he just keeps on making errors on the baseball field and he can't seem to stop, and everything just falls apart for him. I really enjoyed this book. I thought that I would love it more as I did. It's okay, so 3.5 stars for me. I also read the entire Star-Crossed trilogy by Josephine Angelini. That means Star-Crossed, Dreamless, and Goddess. Now, this is a series for me. This was good. This deals with the Greek mythology. It deals with Helen, our main character, who lives on Nantucket. And one day she realizes she's not as normal as she thought she were. She is actually quite special. And she has to deal with these new discoveries in her life. And then in the first book, one day, a family moves to Nantucket, and they are very special as well. And that is when our main character, Helen, realizes that she needs to live her life in another way than what she is used to. Everything changes for her. She cannot ignore this new specialness, and it's all just very interesting. And also it educates you a lot in the Greek mythology. I think I gave 5 stars to the first book, 4 to the second, and 5 to the last one. I love this trilogy, and I'm definitely going to read more by Josephine Angelini in the future. And that brings me to the last book that I read in June, and that is Take Me On by Katie McGarry. Let me just start with saying I gave this book 3 stars. I feel like this series just keeps on taking a downturn, because the first 2 books are rated 4 stars and the last 2 books are rated 3 stars. It deals with a main character called Haley, and she is a kickboxer. And she meets West, who is also part of the 3rd book in the series called Crash Into You, and they fall in love, as you can see from the cover. So yeah, and that's basically it. They have some very hard lives, they struggle, and it's all very sad, but it wasn't something that made me feel captivated in the story. I didn't feel like the characters were as interesting as in the first 2 books. It was okay, but yeah, so 3 stars for me. This was all I read in June. I have 1 more month of reading before I have to go back to work, so I believe I will be able to read a lot of books in July as well. Happy reading, everyone, and bye bye!